his life will be listed. And then you know that in many cases, sex offenders have to register with the local police. Their names have to be made public. Even though they've done their crime, you have to notify neighbors. There's a sex offender living in your neighborhood. All of this is legalized sex repression of the worst sort. And so Levine's rather innocent book, and you know, whatever Levine has said, she gave some interviews which were then edited and made it sound like she supported man-boy sex. She doesn't. I mean, I've done some research, and she has been pillared in the press. You know, her innocent book reaches that kind of reception. Imagine if Wright's Sexual Struggles of Youth were actually being published today in a widespread thing, what the reaction would be. Well, in my usual fashion of disorganization and spontaneity, I think maybe I've said enough, but I'm happy to entertain some questions, and then I got to look at the time because I'm supposed to be stopping now, but I started late. So any questions, please, sir?
I think the age thing also applies to the drinking laws, and that's another kind of confusion for the the adolescent. I started drinking when I was 16, but it was in Chicago. They had 18 up in Wisconsin. Go to Wisconsin buy beer.
Right.
But then you can vote at 18, but then you can also go and kill somebody at 18. So.
Yeah, a lot of colleges' presidents are now arguing for lowering the drinking age to 18 because they feel that keeping it at 21 gives rise to not only the underhand drinking but also the binge drinking. They feel they could better control drinking on their college campuses. It's interesting that you go to college to get drunk. I would have thought you go to college to have sexual interest, but no, the people seem more interested in getting drunk.
Well, I think the relationship between both.
Yeah, sure, the hooking up. You know, I would always say to my students that if your first sexual experience is when you were drunk out of your mind, that's probably not the best introduction to intimacy. Yeah, good.
There's one other factor that some colleges, they want to do it, the drinking laws, so that children will learn to drink before they get to college and solve the problem at home rather than having to solve it freshman year.
I see. So they come having already, well, you know, in Europe, when I was camping, camping in Europe, and there was a soda vending machine. I went over to the vending machine. It was beer. You know, I think it was 14. You could put your coins in and get a beer. You know, it wasn't not such a big deal. But let's stick with sex. Yes.
Well, in terms of the uses of sexual repression, you mentioned Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. My understanding is that at that time there was actually a bill in Congress to raise the minimum wage. And you don't have to be too paranoid to think that rather than do that, that they would blow up this whole story, which was actually quite meaningless. And it never, you know, people never found out about something that was actually important to them, rather than this baloney.
Well, that's interesting, the way in which we can be diverted from things that are a little bit more pressing. By the way, Starr, the lawyer for the impeachment hearings, is now out in California representing some reprehensible group, and I'm forgetting what it is.
Group that's he's defending the ban on gay.
Right. Yeah, that's his. He's their big front person. But all these are diversions away from some of the core issues here, and that's politics, and that's why I think Wright gave up on politics. Left wing, right wing. He says in so many of the things I've seen in the archives, we are neither left nor right. We are go forward, you know. And I think that's what
you also want to connect. You mentioned the issue that this young woman was found guilty of sodomy. That it also has to do, and someone asked the issue of sodomy laws. In most states of the Union, sodomy is still, against the law. You can be prosecuted for.
Right, and it's usually used to prosecute homosexuals.
Yes, but it can be also used against young people who engage in. Because what is most common is that most young people before genital, the issue here we'll get into when I talk about when I can do my presentation, is the issue of genital sexuality and other forms of sexual play and sexual activity. So that what you're also doing by creating the issue and the attack on making sodomy a crime or whatever, sodomy, it's fascinating. It's Christian. A Judeo-Christian concept, sodomy. But the idea of non-genital sexuality as being a crime that remains, even if the age of consent were removed, creates a situation where it's directed, most actively used against homosexuals, but it's also actively used against young people, because the most common, as Wright points out in the sexual struggle of youth, the most common activity for young kids before getting into genital activity would be sexual exploration, sex play, sex games, often oral, manual, other kinds of activities, which are legally prohibited.
Let me, and you're going to go in a second, so let me just take some questions here. So you had one, two, three in that order, please.
The organization was formed in New York.
The Committee for Self-Regulation.
No, there was another, either an offshoot of that or an extension of that, which I remember being involved in about 1950, 51, 52.
Do you remember what it was called?
No, but what we basically did was we would get together and talk about Reich's work and all that. And then Reich ordered it to be stopped, to be dissolved, because he was concerned it would become a meeting place. And in a way that was beginning to happen, people would drift into this.
To look,
yeah.
It's like going to the party and see people.
Anecdotally, Dr. Sophie said it was stopped when Dr. Wright heard from female patients that guys were coming in order to meet women who they could have easy, quick sexual access.
Yeah. Well, one more thing I want to mention is that Arthur Kessler mentioned in one of his books that Reich was a member of the same cell in Parliament as he was.
Right. The INS picks up on that. This INS case is fascinating. One of the things they pick up is on Kessler's reference to Reich in the God That Failed. And what they do, they try to interview Kessler, but Kessler's now living in London, so they can't interview Kessler. Then they try to interview Wolff. Well, Wolff is dead, because Wolff dies rather young. So then INS goes out and interviews Wolff's wife, as if she's going to have the real information on Reich and the Norwegian Communist Party. I mean, the INS case, well, if you're interested, I've written an article about it, and if you email me, I'll put my email address up. I will share it with you, as long as you don't circulate it, because it's currently with the International Forum on Psychoanalysis. I hope they will publish it. Please.
Yeah, not a question, just a comment. There's this popular culture and mass media kind of support of the Jonas Brothers, who are completely supporting abstinence.
Right.
And in all that, they did an interview with Barbara Walters where they talked about their abstinence, but then there was no follow-up about what healthy sexuality is. That this is this ideal to uphold, and that is being preached currently in the mass media.
Yeah, there is no healthy alternative to abstinence save marriage.
Yeah,
once you get married, then you can begin to have your misery. No misery before marriage, please.
Just an interesting thing on how both left and right seem to deal with sexuality. There does seem to be a general pattern where the left kind of twists and distorts right, and then that fires up the right, who then moves. Exemplified, of course, by the Brady and then this guy coming in. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that it makes me curious if the story, what was this person's name? I just forgot.
The book here? Judith Levine.
If Levine, if some of these right people who were jumping in on her even read the book,
no, they
just heard it through a more left-leaning person who was exaggerating.
No, they heard it from Dr. Laura. I mean, actually, the attacks on the university happened even before the book was published, where leaks of parts of the book somehow got out into the right-wing talk radio. Oh, you think left? I don't know.
Yeah.
Look, I know this. If Reich's work that Kevin was brilliantly editing, giving us extracts from, if that work were published today, forget about left, and if it were purged of all of its left-wing stuff, so they couldn't, it would still be viciously attacked. Reich was talking about 12-year-olds exploring their sexuality. I mean, it would be viciously attacked by the right. So I don't know about left-right here, but what we know is that those who think these problems can be solved politically are not rational. They don't understand the depth of human character structure. They think that with a political change, people's character structures will change. That's the point of Reich's analysis of the Soviet Union. Look, they had incredible laws. They decriminalized homosexuality. They allowed for illegal abortions. Marriage in the Soviet Union meant signing a card. When you were finished being married, you ripped up the card. But look what happened That was in the revolutionary period, but then you read Sexual Revolution of what happened subsequently. So this is not going to, the mess we're in is not going to be solved politically. It's going to be solved by raising